I've been thinking a lot about research lately. See, most people think research is about reading books and writing papers. But what about if making music was a form of research? What about if creating music was a way that we use to explore and learn about the world? Would that change how we think about music? This is how it was with my PhD. During my PhD, I used music to explore another culture, another music, another way of thinking about creativity and music. And through the process of creating, I learned more about the music than I could have learned through thinking alone. And that's why the process of thinking through creativity became central to my PhD. Now, it wasn't the only thing I used. I used other methods as well, but it was the central method which made most sense to what I was studying. Let me explain. So in academia, it's called practice-led creative research. And this means when we use an artistic endeavor to learn about the world. And it's got a bad rap in academia because many people say it's not useful, or it's sort of flaky academic work. But let me pose this question to you. If I go off and read a bunch of books about a topic, I learn a lot about that topic, but through the lens of someone else. But if I go and explore a music, and by going to gigs, for example, and checking it out, I learn a whole bunch more about what that music is, how it feels, how it's used in context. Now let me take that one step further. Say I read and learn about it in the books. Then I go to the clubs and the nightclubs and I learn about that music in its context, right? But then I take it one step further. I actually go back to my studio and I go, right, let's try to make that music. Now through the process of making the music, I would learn more about any of those other two methods, I would say. Reading and writing about it gives you one type of knowledge. It gives you an analytical type of knowledge where you can talk about it and you can talk about the history of it and know all these things about it, but it doesn't give you a practical embodied knowledge. Now going to the club gives you that contextual knowledge, that felt experience, which I find totally important and riveting, but it doesn't give you the knowledge of the music itself. You may know how it feels and how it's played in context, but the only way to get right into that music is to actually try to make it yourself, try to recreate it, or create a version of it in your own way. Now, this is what I did with my PhD, and I'm not going to go too deeply into my PhD except to use it as an example, how you can use music or any art actually as a way to research, a way to use your own creativity to explore a subject. And this isn't something we just use in PhDs. What I'm trying to say here is that it's something I continue to use all the time. And it's something you can use as well if you want to learn about a subject deeply and use your creativity to explore it and have fun along the way. Because not only are you learning about what you're researching, but you're also developing skills along the way that actually impact your own work and change your identity around being a creator. All of a sudden, by the end, those things that you've learned aren't just in a book, they're integrated into you as a creative. And that's why I think it's important. So let me give you an example. So my PhD explored a type of music which I termed neo-Santeria, which was an Afro-Cuban religious music which I then found that was developing into these new forms of electronic music. And I was interested in basically looking at the development of this music. But in order to do that, there were two sides to it. There was one, the traditional religious music, and then there was this new emerging music, which was electronica mixed with sort of organic percussion and songs. So it was a real mixture. So in order to learn about these two, I really had to get a hand across the traditional style and also the new style. So what I did is I went to Cuba and I immersed myself in the music over there, and I was studying with some of the teachers, and learning the music from the ground up, learning the rhythms, learning the songs, learning about the music there. Now, on the other end, I was also exploring some of the artists involved in the electronic side of that music. And I started experimenting with the music myself. Now, my question was, in exploring this was, okay, how do they make this electronic music, and how can I explore it by using my own creative process? I started making it in my studio with other friends, other collaborators. I joined with people who also knew about the style, and we started recreating it. And instantly I would run into problems. I would run into roadblocks that I'd have to push through, I'd have to find out about. And at the same time, because he was integrating a sort of traditional knowledge with a sort of technical knowledge of electronic music and all these elements, I really had to explore all of those. And through the process, I learned how those were being integrated. They were being brought together to form this music, which I ended up coining the term called neo-santeria. And so what I found was that creating was a way of discovering and learning in real time, because the more I created, the more I would have to solve problems, the more I would ask questions, and the more I could analyze my own music in relation to the music that was already out there. And so I developed a bit of a feedback loop. So you start with a question. For example, mine was, what is this music made of? What is this music? How is it made? Is the question. And then you create in order to explore that question. Once you create, you come up with an artifact, which may be a song, a video clip, a piece of art, whatever it is you're working on, and then you analyze that again. You can compare it to what's already out there in that scene. You can compare it to the music you're trying to represent, and then I'd create again. Same thing, I go through the process again, I'd analyze that work, go, am I getting closer? Am I getting closer to the representation of that music that's already out there? What is signified in that genre? Am I getting closer to what I internally feel I'm capable of making? My own internal guide, I guess, of, no, I think I can do better than that. So I create again. And through this process of iteration, of creating, of exploring, researching, every time I'm running into roadblocks, like going, oh, I don't understand that rhythm. So I'd have to go back to the traditional source and explore that rhythm. Maybe speak to some people who understand that rhythm really well and learn to play that rhythm, or the song, try to understand the songs. And then maybe my technical know-how in the electronic realm wasn't as good as I thought at that point. So I would have to go and learn some new techniques electronically to produce better, or to make the percussion sit with the drums. And eventually I started growing through the process and learning how to get closer to the benchmark that genre had set. And through that, I learned that what the elements were that were comprising the music, how they were working together, what types of stories they were telling, the images, the artworks, the culture around the scene, the stories and lyrics that were being told about cultural beliefs. All those things came into the process of learning about the genre I was studying. And I wouldn't have got there if it wasn't through the act of creating, the act of actually exploring, because at that point I'd spent maybe 10, 15 years, longer maybe, within this sort of musical world. And I thought I knew a lot about it, but it wasn't until I started really creating and going through that process of exploring through the act of creation that you start coming across what you don't know. It's almost like, say, public speaking or some subject that you think you know. In your head, you think you know it really well. You think, oh yeah, I could do that. That'll be easy, or I know that subject really well. I've been thinking about it forever. But it's not until you go into the act of doing, when you stand up in front of people, or when you go to write out an essay, for example, that you go, damn, I don't really know that subject really well. It doesn't flow out of me as much as I'd like. So you use the creative process to do that, to allow it to flow through you. And it's the act of creating that does that. It becomes a part of you. And that's what practice-led creative research is in the academic world, but it's something you can use in your own processes, just as being creators, exploring a certain topic, asking questions of it, and then going into the creative mode to explore it more deeply. So this brings us to this really cool concept of making is thinking. And what I mean by that is the process of thinking is how we come to chew on things, discern things, explore things in our mind. But making is the way that we actually do things with our bodies, embodied knowledge, how we come to learn the world through actually contact with it. And the creative process is wonderful for that, because not only do you explore by doing, but then the creative process produces an artifact, an objective artifact. And by that I mean something that is tangible. It goes from an intangible idea inside your mind to a tangible thing that you can hold, whether that's a piece of music, a piece of art, a combination of album with an artwork, or even a live performance. They're things that I call tangible things that you can actually objectively look at, and then you can analyze them again. And through that process of analyzing, you can improve on your work. And that process itself is an iterative process that allows you to grow through creativity. And so I implore you, in your next project, whether you're making a song, a piece of art, don't just use music as a form of self-expression, although it is great for that, to just express. But maybe next time, just as an exercise, ask a question. How do they get that sound? Or why do they play it like that? Why do they use those chords? Or what are those rhythms? And don't just think it's enough just to contemplate it. Try to replicate it. Get in there by doing, and as you go through the process, watch what comes up, what pushes you to learn about certain things, and keep creating, and watch your creations grow and evolve, and see what you learn out of them. I keep doing that to this day. It's one of the most exploratory, but also one of the most beautiful processes, because you're actually doing something that you love while learning about something you're interested in. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next one.